In the name of the living God, who is Blessed Trinity. Amen. When growing up, one of the musicals my mom made us watch, and what would become a family favorite, was the 1964 film version of The Unsinkable Molly Brown, starring Debbie Reynolds. Beyond the dance scenes and the catchy music, it was just a fun movie to watch and follow this story. So Molly, throughout this movie, always needs something else in order to find some sense of worth. So it's set where she's born and raised in rural, poor Colorado. And from a postcard, she thinks that I will finally have attained and made it in life if I can move to Pennsylvania Avenue in Denver. So she marries a man who owns a mine, and they become very, very wealthy, and she buys her mansion on Pennsylvania Avenue in Denver. But all the establishment don't want anything to do with Molly. They describe her as the new money. So thinking Pennsylvania Avenue would be enough, it's not. She throws a party to invite all the neighbors. Nobody comes. Maybe I need to move to Europe. So she moves to Europe and is actually invited in and made friends with some of the different royalty. When it's like the light bulb goes off, now I need to bring these new friends back to Denver and show off. So maybe then I will have attained. Invites all the royalty back to Denver, throws a party, but then it quickly turns into a fist fight and food fight, beer fight, and Molly is just horrified. Still, she's not attained. Maybe I should just move permanently back to Europe. And goes back, but as she's there, she finds out that it's not Europe that she's after. But really, it's her husband that she loves. And so gets a ticket to sail back on the Titanic. When it sinks and Molly survives. And of course, it's a Hollywood musical, so there's a nice restoration at the end of the movie, as it always has to work out. Now, I don't know if this is actually all that happened in the real life Molly Brown. There actually was a Molly Brown. She actually did sail on the Titanic. She actually did survive. But for at least this sermon, the movie gives us a good image of somebody that thinks, if I get one more thing, that will be enough. I'll finally be a person of worth. I'll finally arrive. And yet all this movement throughout the movie, Molly never arrives. She never gets enough. So with this image in mind, and we set this in the context of Lent, where part of Lent is this impulse or this concept of self-denial, but not self-denial in the sense that there's something inherently righteous in self-denial, but denying something so that whatever it is we think we had to have, if we deny it, then some space is created to where we are reminded that God really is sufficient, that God really is what we need. What Lent has in mind. Now, when we take all that together and put it with our epistle lesson from Philippians, Paul begins speaking of stuff, and he makes a long list of things that any one of which would be enough to give somebody a sense of status. And so he works his way down the list. He says, when it comes to circumcision, reminding everybody that this was a joyful occurrence in a male baby's life. And it showed, Paul is saying that I belong to the promised people. Then he says he's from Israel, the tribe of Benjamin. Not only is Paul a cradle Jew, but saying he belongs to the tribe of Benjamin, smallest tribe, known for withstanding outside influences, outside pagan influences, with a sense of being pure. Then he says, I'm a Hebrew born of Hebrew. Both parents are Hebrews. He's a Pharisee. He studied the law. Not only did he study the law, but Pharisees believed the law is the door in which we can be in right relationship with God. So you study and then you invite others in to learn what you've studied. You try to teach. Beyond that, he's full of zeal. Paul would not have been one of these people of faith that would have showed up for those 1 or 2 services a year that many show up and churches are filled. We know what those days are. Paul would not have been that kind. He would have completely given himself over in zeal to live out his faith. And as he understood it, it meant stamping out or trying to stamp out that group of people that was a real threat. And so Paul was full of zeal. He lived into all of that. And so he offers up this list. Any one of those things would have shown himself to be of great worth. Anybody in his context would have loved to be just one of those. Paul says, this is who I am. And he lists it using an accounting term as if these was my row of assets. But that's always a complicated 3-letter word. But because of his now movement and conversion to be like Jesus, he's transferring all of his losses, all of his assets over to the side of losses. All of that doesn't mean anything when it comes to what he now sees as his life goal, being in and with Jesus. So that when Paul speaks, he desires that anybody around him hears the words of Jesus. That when Paul acts, people see the fingerprints of Jesus all over his life. Paul doesn't want anything standing in the way of what it means to live and proclaim Jesus. So everything that should have been an asset, he's accounting it. He's calling it loss. But our version we just read cleans it up a lot. I think we said rubbish or loss or trash. I think Paul uses a very graphic term to describe how much of a loss this really is, so that he might know Christ. Everything in life, everything that he held up as once being priority, now drops, because everything in his life, he wants to be pointed to Christ. So all the stuff he listed, wealth, education, status, heritage, none of which I think are inherently bad in and of themselves. Paul didn't apologize for being from the tribe of Benjamin, but he does talk in such a way that if any of these things don't point to Jesus, if we don't use our wealth, our education, our status, our story as helping someone see Jesus, then in his mind, they're in the way and they need to be put aside. Because everything now is pointed to knowing Jesus and proclaiming Jesus throughout life. So as we make our way towards the end of Lent, and next Sunday we begin that journey of Holy Week, it's an encouragement for you and for me, for all of us, to reflect and discern upon our lives. What are those things that we think are so vitally important that we clench and hold on to because we think this is what gives me worth? But in reality, by us clenching onto those things and making something of an idol, it gets in the way of putting forth Jesus. for all of us, what might need to be put aside so that nothing gets in the way for any of us to lift high the cross of Jesus through our lives, through our words, through our actions, through everything. Lifting high Jesus Christ as the goal for any of our lives. And not only that, but that others around us see and experience the love of God. Amen.